Have you ever noticed just how arbitrary the arguments in favour of abortion really are? Abortion advocates will often appeal to certain characteristics that they say determines whether an unborn baby should be regarded as human as you and I, and therefore deserving of life. Each of these characteristics falls under one of 4 categories. These categories have been summed up with the acronym SLED: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. But do any of these characteristics justify the killing of unborn babies? Can a human being's value be measured by how big they are, their development levels, the environment they are in, or their dependency on others? When abortion advocates appeal to the size of the baby, they are implying that human value can be measured by how big a person is. The smaller the human, the less of value that human has. If that is true, that would mean murdering a 26-year-old is worse than murdering a 6-month-old baby. After all, the 26-year-old is bigger. Of course this is absurd. We don't measure a person's value based on how big or how small they are outside of the womb. So it makes no sense suggesting that we can measure a person's value by this arbitrary standard inside the womb. Well, if human value can't be measured by the size of the person, then what about their level of development? This argument suggests that the value of a person increases with their development. The less development, the less value. But again, if that were true, that would mean murdering a 26-year-old with a developed reproductive system is worse than murdering a 6-month-old baby who cannot yet bear children because her reproductive system is less developed. This is nonsense. We don't measure a person's value based on how developed their bodies are outside of the womb, so we shouldn't arbitrarily apply this standard to human beings inside the womb. According to many abortion advocates, being inside the womb is really what makes all the difference. But an appeal to the baby's environment implies human value can be measured by a person's location. In other words, a human being's value will either increase or decrease depending on where that human being is. But is it worse to murder a person indoors or outdoors, in a shopping centre or at the beach, in a car or in a hotel room? We don't measure human value based on location or environment outside of the womb, so we have no reason to imagine that a person's value is magically conferred during the 7-inch journey through the birth canal. Well, if it's not a person's size that determines their value, and it's not their level of development or their immediate environment, then what about their degree of dependency? This notion suggests the more independent a person is, the more value they have as a human being. But if that were true, that would mean it would be worse to murder a 26-year-old who is capable of independent living than a 6-year-old who's dependent on her parents to provide food and clothing and safety, or even an elderly person who's dependent on the care provided in a nursing home. We don't accept that arbitrary standard outside of the womb, and so we have no meaningful basis to apply it to those inside the womb. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency provide no justification for killing a human being, and yet these are the very things the strong appeal to disqualify the weak, the vulnerable, and the defenseless. In the West, we congratulate ourselves for our racial progress, our concern for fair and equal treatment of people of colour. We convince ourselves that if we were around 100 years ago or so, we'd offer Rosa Parks our seat and refuse to adopt the racist attitudes of the day. We look with horror and contempt at anyone who even slightly resembles a Nazi and imagine ourselves to be among those who risk their lives for the vulnerable folk who society deemed less than human. But where is mainstream thought today when a modern-day Holocaust is upon us? Politicians, academics, musicians, Hollywood celebrities, and multi-billion-dollar corporations are all actively advocating this new and more evil Holocaust which sees the destruction of millions of unborn human beings every year. Society hasn't progressed. We've just shifted our violence to a more vulnerable member of our society, then upped it 100-fold.